Thank you for joining us. I'm John Razimus, and this is The Occult Unmasked. The most recent book I finished reading today is called Qliphoth Opus 3. So this book has about 14 different sections by about 14 different authors, although some of them repeat, so I guess there might be 13 or 12 or 11 authors, but there's a good number of occultist authors in here. And not all of them are diehard believers. There's a journalist in here. Just to give you an overview of my favorite parts, because I don't even want to mention the parts I didn't like. The book starts off pretty interesting, talking about the Tree of Death, which is the opposite of the Kabbalah Tree of Life. I would say, knowing very little about the Tree of Life or the Tree of Death, I would say they're probably the same thing. That's just my opinion. I'd say there's a good chance they're the same thing. And that's coming from someone that has not ever participated in any of those workings. I'm not an occultist. I'm not a magician. But they look like the same thing, just different names. But nonetheless, it was interesting to read about the Tree of Death. And the second story is about a magician who makes his own elixirs out of mandrake. Mandrake is it's probably one of the most popular magical ingredients, historically speaking. Sometimes it's hard to pinpoint what mandrake is. There is a plant that is considered mandrake plant, but there are arguments. That's never mentioned in the book. That's just what I've learned outside before reading this book. But he talks about how he makes an elixir out of mandrake from letting it decompose for a month. And of course he calls it a moon instead of a month to try to sound more magical, I guess. But it was still an interesting story. There was a voodoo dream, perhaps astral vision, that was very interesting by a guy named Qliphoth. He talks about being decapitated by these voodoo spirits, and they take him to a place, and in these astral dreams you can't die, and so decapitation and getting anything chopped off, it's all just a dream, but it's still pretty freaky stuff. And he has words written on his forehead which means something symbolically. Dreams are very symbolic. He never says it's a dream, but it's pretty clear that it's a lucid dream that he's describing. It's what a lot of these magicians claim happens during these ceremonies. They go into a trance and they go into a lucid dream type state. And it's one of those things you can't capture on video camera. So if you see a magician on YouTube claiming they're in a trance and they see something crazy, you can't see someone's lucid dream. Not with our current technology anyway. You can in a couple movies. But it was a very interesting story, and he claims he went to some type of hellish underworld bar where they're shuffling cards and drinking, and the way he described it, it sounded like a Tim Burton movie. It sounded like Corpse Bride or something out of The Nightmare Before Christmas. Yeah, it was interesting to read about. The next interesting story, I would say, was by Sean Woodward. And I'd like to actually read it real quick, just a tiny, maybe just one sentence. On page 65, "The crossroads is not confined to a dusty intersection on the outskirts of town, where once passing old bluesmen might impart a little of the wisdom born of a life of wandering and earthly experience. It is a sacred space that can be formed in the corner of a room, by the earth beneath our feet, at a table or altar, or in any place the adept desires, because the influence of the spirits is not limited to the areas of migration of the Afro-Atlantean tradition, but rather to the subtle environs of the adept." And what I would like to focus in on this was, he says the crossroads, which are famously from that famous blues legend of the most famous blues, the blues legend, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Very interesting story. And you can look at his Wikipedia page. He's a blues legend. And I should do an entire episode about the Crossroads, because the Crossroads is a very interesting story. This blues legend didn't start out as a blues legend. He went to the clubs, was known as the worst blues player in the entire club, or at least the worst guitarist, the worst singer, the worst musician. And they let him play for free. They felt sorry for him, but he was so horrible. They told him, don't come back. You're not welcome. You're not very good. We'll let you play here and there, but the people, they don't buy drinks. They don't come into the business when you're playing. He left for about 2 or 3 months, and he came back, and he was the best guitar player they'd ever heard in their life. He was the best singer they'd ever heard in their life. He invented the blues, and he was the best performer. He drew many people wanted to come into that bar to listen. They all bought drinks. It was a very popular place, and they all asked him because the musicians and the bar owner and the locals, they knew that he was notoriously the most horrible musician there. They asked him, how on earth in a few months did you go from the worst to the greatest? Where did you pick up this blues style? Where did you get it from? How did you learn how to play the guitar so well? And a myth was attributed to him that he met the devil at the crossroads, and that he showed him how to play the guitar, showed him the blues style. And that's just a legend. So it's just a legend. They asked him, did you make a deal with the devil to get this good or something? Did you go to the crossroads? And see, nobody knows where the myth originated. It could have originated from the people accusing him of becoming too good too fast, and that the people accusing him might have made it up. Supposedly he never denied that it didn't happen. But when you become rich and famous and successful, at least even to a small degree, you tend to shrug off people saying things. Just look at celebrities today. If they're claimed to be this or that, what is their response usually? It's usually, whatever. Yeah, well, whatever you say. So that's probably what happened. He was probably falsely accused, and he never denied it. But some claim that he said he specifically went to a specific crossroads, and that a man showed up, and the man was black, and that he didn't know who this man was, but he just mysteriously appeared out of nowhere with a guitar, and he showed him exactly how to play the guitar. He showed him exactly the blues style, and that being disappeared, and then he made a deal with it, and that deal involved, obviously, his soul for the blues, and he could sing the blues so well because he didn't have his soul anymore, and so he's tormented, and so he's if you sold your soul, you would be pretty tormented. But that's the story. But back to this book, which mentions that the crossroads is not confined to a dusty intersection. It's a sacred space, and it can be found in the corner of a room by the earth beneath our feet. Now, I've had personal experiences with corners of rooms being infested, being highly active with invisible forces. Let's just say invisible forces of the universe. And so this book is interesting in the fact that it mentions that. It confirms what I already know from firsthand personal experience. I'm not an occultist, not a magician. Just in a few rooms I've lived in my life, I've noticed, that's interesting. Yes, it could be the foundation settling and the walls creaking. Just normal wall creaking, foundation settling. It's not that, trust me. The very tripod, I can't mention that story. It's too detailed. The reason I can't mention the detailed story of myself being haunted in a room by a poltergeist for a good 6 months is because it's the meat of the book that I'm writing. Now, probably after I publish this book, I'll be happy to read. I'll read segments. I'll read sections. You can buy it. It'll probably be on PDF. Very cheap. I'll have a nice deluxe hardback copy that'll hopefully look even better than this. And I'm just really getting into the artistry of books. And so I'm going to definitely have a leather edition. And it's going to be a good portion of it my personal encounters with invisible entities and ghosts. Now, I'm not crazy. I don't have any preconceived notions. but I don't believe they're aliens. I believe they're interdimensional, which just means a dimensional being that can go in between different dimensions. The reason they can go in between is because they can go down. We are three-dimensional beings, or you might even say we're fourth-dimensional beings because we live in time-space and space-time. And we can perceive and conceive of what a two-dimensional being would look like. We can go down there and mess with a two-dimensional being, and that two-dimensional being doesn't really exist, but the closest thing to a two-dimensional being would be an amoeba on a slide, moving around on a slide. Its dimensions are more than 2 dimensions, but for the sake of argument, an amoeba on a slide moving around is close to a two-dimensional being. And we can kill that amoeba, we can smash it, we can inject it with things. It's going to have no comprehension of what we're doing. There are a lot of other analogies of us looking down on dimensions, such as a fish pond, looking down on that Chinese fish pond with those giant Chinese goldfish. And, you could throw them some food, and they'll have some concept of, hey, there's the guy that throws us food, but they don't really have much understanding of the world where that hand comes from. We can possibly see glimpses of higher dimensional beings, but we're not going to have full comprehension of where they come from and what they look like and what they do. I personally believe higher dimensions do exist. And this book, I found it interesting. Let me just mention a few other sections. There's a Vodon section, which was interesting, by David Maples. There's a Norse necromancy section at the very end, which was interesting from a historical perspective. It used to be forbidden to practice necromancy. It's probably forbidden in a lot of places, but more specifically, to speak with the dead. It was illegal to speak with the dead in Iceland in ancient times, but it is not anymore. He mentions how it's legal now. So a lot of places are becoming more open-minded. It's legal now in Iceland to practice sorcery and communicate with the dead. But, speaking of communicating with the dead, there are TV shows of spirit mediums communicating with the dead on a regular basis. So it's not that outlandish. And this book, I made a little chart on which ones I liked, which ones I didn't. I found about 6 of the stories in here enjoyable and entertaining and interesting from many different aspects. And I found that there's 14 different sections. 6 out of 14 I found interesting. There are some explicit, adults-only parts in this book, which I do not recommend to anyone, and it's probably illegal to recommend it. If you're a young person, don't read a book like this. There are a lot of explicit, really gross sections, which I would not recommend, but despite the fact that they're explicit and gross, they weren't interesting to me, and that's why I didn't like them. The one with the decapitation and the voodoo spirits taking this guy to an underground bar in hell, that was pretty explicit, but he was interesting. He was creative. And so 6 out of 14, that's about 3 out of 7. And taking that down because I only have 5 skulls to rate it on. I don't like to rate half a skull, but in this case I have to. I give this book Qliphoth Opus 3, 2.5 skulls out of 5. And we're out of time for right now, and I thank you for watching. This has been John Razimus with the Occult Unmasked. Be seeing you.